Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this ABA webinar, Money Mules, the Enablers of Scams. My name is Michael Grover, and I'm the Regional Director for most of Asia for Qorus. And I'm honored today to be asked to moderate this webinar. Now, before introducing the speakers, I just have one little bit of housekeeping. We will have time for questions and answers after the session. So please record your questions in the chat box and we'll try and address all of them if we can, or certainly most of them directly after the presentation. Now, joining us today are two industry experts from Asia. We have Gabby Tomas, who's a Senior Vice President Operations, RCBC from the Philippines, and also Thanh Director of Market Planning, Fraud and Identity, Asia Pacific at LexisNexis Risk Solutions in Singapore. Now, they're going to provide a deeper look into the rising threat of money mule scams, uncovering how the criminals exploit everyday individuals and the much broader impact on the global fight against cybercrime. So, without further ado, let me hand over to Thanh.
Let me set things up. Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar organized in conjunction with the Asian Bankers Association. My name is Thanh, but you call me Thai in the short form. I look after the fraud and identity business at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. In the next 20 to 25 minutes or so, I will discuss how money mules play a pivotal role in funneling scam proceeds to cyber criminals. And I will be looking at money mules from a fraud perspective, although this topic is closely linked to compliance and money laundering, but that is a topic for a different webinar. Before we go deeper into the discussions about mules and we look at the general trends in the APAC regions. Money mules move illicit funds between different parties with fraudsters as the ultimate destination. This fund could have been obtained from scams and other illegal activities, and we look at the typical modus operandi of mules. In the last sections, I will discuss key steps in hunting for mules, and that leads into the panel discussion with Gabby Tomas, Senior Vice President and Operations Group Head at RCBC. A quick introduction about LexisNexis Risk Solutions. We are part of RELEX. We are active in three key areas: fraud and identity, financial crime compliance, and payment efficiency. We have offices in key locations in the APAC regions and work with over 2,000 customers in 35 countries, including 9 out of 10 of the top 10 banks in the region. A quick snapshot of the headlines around the regions. Online fraud is a growing problem in some part of Asia. Record losses linked to online fraud and scams were reported in many parts of APAC. As scams and other types of fraud grow in sophistication and intensity, so does fraudsters' reliance on money mules. Money mules are a key enabler of digital banking fraud, which impact consumers and organizations around the globe. A money mule is a bank account or a holder of an account necessary for receiving fraudulent funds, so this can be transferred and cashed out. In this instance, the aim is to help obscure the trail of ill-gotten gains and make more challenging to trace those to the ultimate recipients. Money can move rapidly through a large network of seemingly unconnected mule accounts held at multiple financial institutions, making it harder to track. Mules also often used for the purpose of laundering of money through the financial system. We analyze billions of transactions every year, and last year we analyzed 124 billion transactions. The data from these transactions form the basis of the LexisNexis Digital Identity Network, a repository of crowdsourced tokenized data from our entire customer base. So using this intelligence, we build reliable, anonymized digital identities of every online user as they transact across location, devices, and digital businesses. This slide shows what we call Identity Abuse Index, which shows the percentage of attacks per day across our entire global network over the last 2 years. The general trend is gradual increase in fraud attacks with ups and downs. And if we use 1.5% attack rate as an illustration and apply that to 124 billion transactions annually, that would translate to around 5 million fraud attacks per day, which is an astonishing number. Sometimes we can see large spike in attack rate when specific organizations are targeted or specific data breaches are being reused by fraudsters around the globe. Consistent with what we have seen from the headlines and what authorities have reported, we know that online fraud is still a growing problem in APAC. The region experienced a significant rise in human initial attacks as well as in bot attacks, with a year-on-year growth of 61 and 55% respectively. Fraud is also growing in sophistication. Most reported cases or the number of cases are linked to third-party fraud, such as account takeover, phishing, identity theft. Many of these cases are linked to unauthorized fraud, whereby criminals have gained unauthorized access to the victim's account. We do observe, however, in recent years that there's a shift to more sophisticated fraud in various forms, such as social engineering and impersonation scam, and even more elaborate scams such as investment and romance scam, money mules, and emergence of deepfake scams. What these sophisticated scams have in common is that the victims are sending the money to the scammers under coercion, threat, or under other social engineering tactics. The risk signals from this authorized payment fraud are very different from the traditional third-party or unauthorized fraud. Singapore and Australia are used for illustration purposes, as authority in these two countries provided up-to-date and detailed breakdown of reported fraud numbers. Looking at the financial impact of scams, we observe a consistent trends around the region. Investment scam, a form of authorized payment fraud, are consistently ranked at the top of the fraud pyramid in many APAC countries. Moreover, in Singapore, more than 82% of reported fraud cases were linked to authorized payment fraud. And this type of fraud have the highest impact to the victims from a monetary perspective. Cyber criminals generally do not work alone. Some are operating in a loosely defined network, and some are organized more professionally. This visualization shows how individual fraud attempts are actually linked to larger network of attacks. Rectangles represent members' organization within LexisNexis Digital Identity Network, and for this analysis, we focus only on banks. Arrow represent digital identity who have been associated with confirmed fraud attempts at one source organization, attempting to interact with or target a subsequent organization. A thicker line denotes a higher volume of attacks. While fraud on digital identity tend to operate within one region, you can see that there's still significant links going across countries. The assumption here is that data and techniques are being shared around the globe, for instance, within fraud syndicates. And this example also explains clearly why there's continued dialogue around digital consortium, which can enable faster industry collaboration in the fight against fraud. To better understand how money mule operate, let's look at the three common types. Complicit mule. This is a purposely open mule account, and it is set up specifically for mule activities by the fraudsters themselves or by complicit individuals. They knowingly participate in receiving and transferring funds on behalf of criminals. They are typically motivated by financial gain. With the mule, this is a recruited mule from legitimate accounts whose owner knowingly begin to engage in mule activities. They may have been lured into schemes under fraud pretenses or intimidations, or may be convinced that their involvement is legitimate. They may be motivated by promises of easy money or by the belief that they are assisting in a legal financial transactions. And lastly, unwitting mule, these are genuine accounts whose owners have been unwittingly scammed into conducting mule activities. They are unaware that they are involved in criminal activity at the start of the scam. Criminals use various tactics to trick unwitting individual into receiving and transferring funds without knowledge of the criminal intent. They're not motivated by criminal intentions. Instead, they may believe that they're helping a friend or a legitimate business. Unwitting mules may gradually realize that what they're doing is illegal and may become with the mule as this activity progresses. This slide should scare us all. In the Asia Scam Report by Global Anti-Scam Associations, one of the survey questions was related to money mule. The question was, if someone offers you an amount of money and you can keep part of it under the condition that you would send the rest to another account, would you do it? So please keep the answer to yourself and do not put in the chat. But the survey results are highly certainly not encouraging. It's also highlight the uphill battle organizations face in tackling this mule problem. Mule herders in charge of recruiting money mules frequently focus their efforts on young people, capitalizing on some individual limited awareness of the potential consequences associated with their involvement. A common tactic, for example, is to recruit students by offering them incentive to use their identity or buy their accounts. Adults in older age group are attractive as well for Mule network, in part because their bank accounts are likely have a longer history and larger transfer are likely to raise less suspicions. In addition to account takeover, let's look at some of the other common tactics that for recruiting money mule. This list is not exhaustive, and there are likely many variations. The first one is job adverts. Fraudsters may pose as legitimate employers offering work opportunities through job boards or social media. Romance tactics. Fraudsters can create fake online relationship, building trust with the victim before recruiting them as mule and requesting assistance with money transfers. Impersonations. Fraudsters may impersonate representative of legitimate businesses, financial institutions, or government agency, attempting to convince victims to make the transactions. Blackmail, threat, and coercion. Fraudsters may gather compromising information about individuals through phishing attacks or other means and use it to blackmail them into becoming money mule. This is an alarming trend that involves the recruitment of at-risk individuals to act as money mules. Exploitation and of the financial vulnerability. Fraudsters may target individuals facing financial difficulties, offering them quick solutions or easy way to earn money. And lastly, of course, social media is a fertile ground for recruiting money mules. Criminals deploy various methods to conceal their identity and use network of mule to hide the destination of funds and make it more difficult for organization and authority to trace those funds. Generally, there are 4 steps in funneling fraudulent funds through money mule networks. Illicit funds that flow through mule accounts are often obtained through a variety of fraudulent activities, such as scams. Fraudulent funds are then introduced into the banking system. Fraudsters either use stolen or synthetic identity to create new accounts that cannot be traced back to them, or they leverage mule accounts that have been recruited by tactics that I have just discussed. Fraud network attempts to hide their activity through a series of transactions. Money is transferred between mule accounts held across several banks in multiple locations. Sometimes money is converted to cryptocurrency. And lastly, once clean, the source of funds become harder to trace and fraudsters can cash out. As I mentioned before, money mules facilitate the movement of fraudulent funds, which can threaten the stability of financial organizations. Detecting and stopping money mule is therefore a critical step in mitigating fraud and preventing losses. Failing to detect mule network clears the path to escalating fraud scheme, impacting both the consumer and organization, and regulators may impose monetary fines as well. So this visualization illustrates an example of movement of funds through a mule network. Prior to receiving fraudulent funds, mule account holders may make small arbitrary debit and credit to establish a payment history with the bank. Through layering of funds, mule network can stay under the radar for a period of time when organizations do not have adequate fraud defenses. So let's look at a real-life example of a mule network based on analysis that we have conducted, leveraging LexisNexis Threat Matrix and our digital identity network. Multiple variations of scams described on the previous pages are attempted daily around the world, with attempt to cash out involving crypto exchanges and online gaming and gambling sites. So this visualization shows the extent of the challenge faced by financial institutions, crypto exchanges, gaming and gambling operator, and law enforcement. The arrow represents digital identity associated with confirmed mules seen at one organization, now moving to a different institution, creating new mule accounts, checking on funds received, or initiating further fund transfer and layering of funds. So those illicit funds are then laundered through a crypto exchange, and attempts were made to cash out those funds at gaming and gambling sites. Differentiating between legitimate and suspicious activity from a vast number of daily interactions and transactions can be complex. While it's easier to spot patterns within an organization's own customer interaction, the difficulty arises when tracking patterns that involve external entities, especially when funds are transferred outside the bank's direct oversight and overseas. The foundation for effectively identifying and interrupting more mule accounts rests on the ability to understand the parties involved more holistically. The analysis may include digital and physical identity and associated attributes, events and behavior, accounts and beneficiary interactions, and of course transactions. The approach involves 4 key steps, and I will walk through these 4 key steps in the next few slides. Link insight across multiple dimensions, leverage global and cross-industry intelligence, identifying suspicious risk pattern with machine learning model, and two-party risk view with global beneficiary insights. So let's look at the first one. Cybercriminals employ various methods and social engineering tactics to trick unsuspecting victims into sharing their sensitive information and coercing victims into transferring funds from their own account to scammers. Consequently, a fraud prevention strategy must incorporate different layers or dimensions to tackle a variety of fraud scenarios. For instance, credit card fraud has a different risk profile than a risk profile of a mule transactions or other forms of authorized payment fraud. So creating a risk profile of an online event, transaction, or interactions with the digital businesses require organizations to analyze data attributes from different dimensions. For example, an email address is often used in cross-border transactions. Think of when you set up a bank account, crypto account, or other e-commerce account, and so on. So on average, most individuals use the same primary email address for more than 10 years. And over the lifetime, that email address is linked to, on average, again, 130 different online businesses. So it provides a very rich history of online behavior of the digital identity. Digital intelligence includes a variety of data attributes that are associated with digital identities, devices, IP addresses, email addresses, phone number, and so on. Behavioral intelligence is a key component in the organization fraud strategy. A genuine user behaves differently than a fraudster, but also a genuine user under stress behaves differently from the historical behavioral profile of that user. While the user is being coached by the scammer to execute, let's say, a payment, the handling of the device may be more erratic. And as we have seen in an earlier slide, bot attack volume have increased significantly in recent years. In our digital identity network, we distinguish between human-initiated attacks and bot attacks. And last year, we detected over 600 million bot attacks in our network in APAC alone. And lastly, digital onboarding is now the default process in creating new accounts with digital services. This is convenient and efficient. But with the emergence of AI deepfake scams, physical intelligence is a key defense in preventing fraudsters from creating fraudulent and mule accounts on your digital platforms. And the use of AI to create AI-generated ID documents and deepfake images is an emergent fraud risk. Stay on the topic of assessing risk from different dimensions. We conducted a case study And the objective was to identify location with higher concentration of fraudulent and mule transactions. And we focus on Southeast Asia for the study. The red dots indicate geolocation with higher concentration of confirmed mule network. Moreover, by analyzing the various signals from the mobile device, we also noted that in location with lower atmospheric pressure, basically area in higher altitude, the fraud rates were also higher. When we map back those high-risk area back to a geolocation, we found that these locations were consistent with media reports about scam centers in mountainous area along the border between Thailand and Myanmar. Money mules play a key part in fraud by helping distance the fraudster from the initial fraudulent activity. Detecting mules at the local level and cross-border require vast fraud intelligence resources supplemented by device location and a raft of other risk-based intelligence. This is one of the best weapons against fraud and mule network that enable it. Leveraging this network help shed light on mule operations spanning multiple institutions and allows organizations to make highly informed risk assessment, not just on the transaction, but also behavior of the entity making those transactions and on hidden association between devices and phone number that they use, for example. A multitude of signals and subtle changes across the customer journey may indicate money mule activities. So using this machine learning model, an organization can begin associating risk, increasing risk to a variety of consumer behavior and interactions. Some accounts being used for mule activity tend to be newly opened. Fraudsters often use stolen and synthetic information when opening new mule account to hide their real identity. A newly opened account that presents high velocity activity might also be associated with mule operations. Many mule accounts belong to genuine users recruited as mules. Subtle changes in that behavior can be indicative of money mule activities. So the key takeaway is that a few risk signals may not provide a conclusive result, but a holistic approach delivers a more effective risk assessment of online behavior and interactions. For instance, when we analyze behavior across multiple touchpoints in the customer lifecycle, we are able to separate trusted accounts from fraudulent and mule accounts. And lastly, fraud detection model can be trained and improved with fraud feedback. Authorized payment scams, including money mules, are incredibly hard to detect, as genuine customers are sending the money themselves bypassing typical anti-fraud technology. Every scam requires stolen money to be transferred from the victims to another account within the global banking system. Traditionally, organizations focus on risk assessing the sender and build a risk profile of the account owner in your bank. The recipient or beneficiary risk outside your network is often overlooked. The beneficiary could be a mule account or an account that have already been marked as fraudulent in the network. So analyzing sender and beneficiary intelligence and the relationship between the two parties will make it more difficult for fraudsters to hide their illicit funds. This analysis may incorporate risk signals related to transaction data, behavioral anomalies, device intelligence, IP addresses, geolocation, email, and phone numbers, and so on. And lastly, account beneficiary and sender risk assessment give a more reliable measure of the likelihood that a bank account the victim's funds are heading for is owned or controlled by scammers to receive fraudulent funds. And additionally, the same concept can be applied to risk assess incoming payment to detect and prevent bad actors such as mule and the scam account from entering your bank network and to meet compliant requirements. And that's brings me to the end of the presentations, and I will hand it back to Michael for a panel discussion with Gabby Tomas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thay. Very, very engaging and should I say a little bit scary. The volumes 5 million a day. Staggering, absolutely staggering and scary. It occurred to me that it's clear that even countries where there's a high level or higher level of financial sophistication, like Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, they're not immune from this level of scamming and fraud. Is this a developing trend?
Yeah, in a way, yes, Michael, you're correct. So I think when we look at, let's say, Hong Kong, and in this example, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, of course, one of the common theme is, of course, they have affluent consumer base. The other part that we look at is, of course, they are financial hub. They are large financial hub that actually facilitate payment and monetary transfer around the globe. The other part, if we look at individual countries, for example, Hong Kong, even though it's a large population, technology advanced, but they are quite slow. Organizations were quite slow to react to online fraud in recent years, and Japan is a bit more isolated. And of course, in the past, there was one key barrier, which is the culture and language barrier. But of course, with now AI, when you can do voice cloning within 30 seconds, that barrier has been removed in a way. And of course, Singapore is an open economy and the hub of large digital businesses for the region. So, yeah, in a way, yes, you're correct, but the underlying factors are changing and the difference between locations.
Gabby, could you add anything to that from the Philippines?
Yeah, very, very staggering statistics there from Thanh. However, in the Philippines, we have to balance that. We have to balance that because there's a push towards financial inclusion. And if you're going to do financial inclusion, obviously you will have account holders who do not know the full impact of what their accounts really are at the moment. And we've seen, especially account holders in rural areas who are economically challenged and they start selling their credentials without knowing what these are going to be used for. For as low as $10, they can sell their credentials, and that now becomes the network of mule accounts. So I think you're right. I agree with Thanh that we need to have some transactional identity, some digital monitoring of these particular accounts. And aside from that, we need to do some cooperation among banks. We have to set up the perimeter. If we cannot prevent the velocity of funds for the first instance, at least we will prevent them from doing it again. We will identify these accounts and close them, and we can make the world smaller. Hopefully, make the world smaller for these scammers.
Do you think the local regulators should be doing more in terms of raising public awareness and or actively discouraging people? Because that statistic on the slide from Thai about the number of people that are quite prepared to sell their identity is clearly a major worry, particularly when a lot of banks are, as you say, going down the route of financial inclusion.
That's right. In the Philippines, just last year, legislation was passed criminalizing the sale of your financial credentials. And if they're used for illicit accounts, then the owner of these accounts, whether he knowingly engages or doesn't, is liable. So I think it's a big step for us. I think all regulators and governments should put in such measures.
What sort of criminal sanction is imposed in the Philippines?
Well, the law has just been passed. There's going to be implementing rules and regulations still going to be issued subsequent to that, but it's going to be definitely criminal liability. Interesting.
Any other examples on that from your side, Thai?
Yeah, I think it's very important to raise awareness and having work with a lot of institutions around the region, one of the challenges has always been, so how do you reach part of the population that do not have access, let's say, to internet, or do not actually check the news on a daily basis, especially in rural areas. So, and even though people are aware of that, that certain activities are risky or can lead to scam, they still sometimes they actually still actually engage in that because the offer is too good to be true in a way. So education is helpful, but at the same time, I mean, the consumers still need to remain vigilant and make sure that think before you act in a way.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just looking in the Q&A box in the chat, we've got a question here from Prasad. How many instances of use of money mules in terror finance were identified? Have there been instances where ISIS has used money mules to remit money to their operatives in different geographies? That's quite a loaded question.
That's right.
Yeah, I think, I mean, so so let's go back to one of the slides I mentioned, is that of course we work based on tokenized data. So what we do is when we identify that, let's say, an account, a digital identity, it could be an email address, could be a phone number, could be a device that has created high risk signals, for example, those transactions are being blocked or being prevented from being executed. So to answer that question, of course, we need to look in very specific cases, and of course, looking at where those transactions are coming from, because oftentimes, of course, a lot of cyber criminals are using or spoofing devices, are using different techniques to mask their identity as well as their locations.
Okay. I think there's also another issue here as well, which is, and it's related to identity theft. So most of us operate within the digital world, and consumer confidence in operating digitally is obviously of paramount importance, and part of the whole customer experience is providing security and that feeling of confidence that you can remit money digitally without potentially losing your identity or anything else, either via a wallet or whatever, or a card. Do you think banks and card issuers, for example, should be doing better or more to prevent identity theft and secure customer data?
Are you addressing that question to me?
I was. I'm afraid.
Okay, sorry. All right. Yeah, I mean, if you look at fraud in the past, organizations were treating fraud in the past as as part of the cost as part of doing business, but as our fraud and the related losses are evolving and escalating. We see that organizations take it more seriously, especially banks where they are the forefront, because they are the one that actually help to facilitate some of this transfer and payments. So, and of course, tackling different types of fraud require a multi-layer strategy by looking at the risk from different dimensions. But at the same time, be vigilant. But when an individual still downloads a malicious app or fill in an online form for a free gift, that remain a risk. So only when stolen information enters the organization digital platform, the organization can take actions. And you mentioned about credit card fraud. If you're familiar with some of the security feature on credit card, is that in Europe and in UK, 3DS is mandated as part of the fraud prevention measure. That's why the fraud losses related credit card is lower in, let's say, in Europe than in other parts of the regions, where that is not mandatory, although credit card issuers do offer the security features in the rest of the regions.
Yeah, thanks. Gabby, you're responsible in RCBC for operations, so this clearly falls in your remit. What are your views on this?
Well, it's very difficult to talk about money mules without talking about the vulnerability of the clients themselves. Social engineering, they're the weakest link. So I think, and I've always recommended that certain delays on any transactions, certain attitude changes of our people, of our clients, we always tell them to think first before they do something, before they give their credentials or their OTPs. The longer they take to think about these things, we believe the less the chances that they will give these voluntarily. And I think it's all about mindset. And the social engineering part, you can never underestimate it. No matter how much we try to secure the perimeter, how much we try to put our KYC controls in place, if our KYC client is going to be knowingly victimized, then it becomes very, very difficult for us. But that, I think, is one of the things that we need to continue to inform our clients about what they should and should not be doing.
Yeah, and I agree with Gabby as well. So you do see that regulators around the region to actually implement the slowdown control. For example,
Yes.
when you set up a new beneficiary account, you cannot transact it for X number of days or X number of hours. So these some of preventive measures will help to reduce, but of course, there's always a way to work around that, and of course, cyber criminals eventually find a way to do that. So, but but step by step, we just hopefully we stay ahead of the cyber criminals mindset.
Right, it's a moving target, right?
Yeah,
very much so. And the dichotomy is financial inclusion against financial education.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you, there's a question here in the chat. Do you agree that the increase in money mule activities is also caused by human nature of greed in getting easy money compared to personally involved in complicated crime? That's an interesting question. Gabby, perhaps you could put your operational head on again.
Well, I think the transactional identity comes in very, very relevant at this point. Part of the monitoring should be what is the normal level of activity for accounts. If you see anything that is out of the ordinary, that is not commensurate to the declared use or reason, then that should be at least a red flag. And that's how I think the first level of defense that we can put up is to identify hot accounts, so to speak.
I remember reading something, I forget where, about 6 or 7 months ago, that was looking at the incidence of scamming between around the world. And is the incidence of scamming more prevalent amongst the older generation in Asia Pacific, or is it the younger generation? Is it naivety versus forgetfulness for the sake of simplicity? What's the experience on that?
Yeah, I think you will be surprised, to be honest. So if you look at the scam victim profile across the region, of course, depending on what types of scam, and the locations, etc. What we do see is that the younger adults group, as well as the adults group, that the age range between 20 and 40 years old, they are actually, in terms of the numbers, the largest scam victims, surprisingly. And of course, when you target, and in Japan, for example, the target group is a bit more older, because the scam is what they call it's me scam, or friendly scam. So you pretend to be, let's say, a niece or nephew, and ask for, let's say, financial support, for example. So that happens quite often in Japan. So in other regions, so what we call fake friends scam, for example, you pretend to be an old friend. You have a chat, and then eventually that will lead into discussions about financial support. So yes. But I think that the majority of what we have seen from the report that we have seen around the regions is in that age group.
Interesting. Same experience for you, Gabby?
Yes, I would say it's similar. One of the things I noted, I think 2 years back, I talked about it, was the rise of AI and the democratization of fraud solutions. So fraudsters who are developing these fraud solutions not only make money out of using their solutions, but actually sell their solutions on the dark web. So now you have the rise of amateurs who are using these particular tools. They're not necessarily anymore big networks. They're just amateurs victimizing people. So that's also another thing we need to be vigilant about as well.
What do you think technology-wise is likely to be employed by organizations, banks, financial institutions to combat mules in the future, in the immediate future? I'm not asking you to look 20 years ahead.
Yes,
the world changes way too fast for that. Yeah.
Yes. Well, what we can do is work with global firms who have years of experience in this field, like LexisNexis. We are talking to them in the Philippines. We have to look at digital identity, digital biometrics, digital identity, so that we can see whether particular other factors we can identify what are potentially accounts that have been compromised. We believe that there is enough information. If they're using a mobile phone, there's enough information we can get on the mobile phone itself, so that we can make a educated guess whether it's been compromised or not. But this is the immediate solution. As we move forward, we will have to evolve, because we know that the fraudsters will find a way around this anyway, right?
You think then that we're moving more towards rather than an OTP, a one-time password, something where you have a one-time identity that disappears after you've used it once?
That is, I think, one of the things that's being contemplated right now. The one-time password remains still the most effective way. However, that's why the fraudsters need to do social engineering. But we are exploring other ways we can fortify that particular multi-factor authentication.
Hi, what from your side, because you're the you're the people with the information.
Yeah, it's just quite interesting question. So as you know, we have fraud has evolved so much in the last 6-7 years, right? So when you look at maybe a long time ago, I'm talking about 10 years ago, you probably received an email where it's not a real-time fraud, when someone's asking, to pretend a prince from some countries and ask for money. So that was the early stage of a scam, for example. Of course, now we evolve into online scams, a real time as well. But when you look at the different types of scam, you see that they have something in common, right? So one is the device, one the digital intelligence, email address, IP address. But what you now see is that using AI or using bots, that dynamics has changed, right? So now with bots, you can actually you can almost mimic human behavior. So you constantly need to actually improve the fraud defenses in such a way that, looking at different behavior against not just the normal pattern, but also the historical pattern of that user. So there are multiple ways of actually looking at that, but as what Gabby mentioned, of course, fraudsters still evolve, and we will also evolve as well. So that's just always a race that, to who's going to be the first one to actually develop better tools in a way.
Now, Gabby, there's another one for you, I think, because do you think the removal of POGOs in the Philippines lessened the incidence of identity theft and other scams? POGOs.
Okay. The POGOs in the Philippines, usually they operate as business process outsourcing for other countries. So I would say that the removal in the Philippines on a global scale actually actually benefits everyone. What I find is that what we find is that for those that are scamming in a particular country, the operation is usually overseas, right? So that there's some way that they can avoid legal implications to them. So closing these scamming hubs on the whole benefits everyone. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, wasn't familiar with that myself. So, okay, there's another one from another anonymous attendee. What role can savings and thrift banks play in helping victims of money mule scams recover their funds or report the incident? And how can savings and thrift banks collaborate with law enforcement to investigate and combat such money mule scams? Who wants to take that one first?
All right. Savings and thrift banks. These are the other players in the industry who probably have presence in the far-flung areas, in the provincial areas, who provide banking services to some of our clients who are located not in the business centers, right? And I think what they can really do is collaborate. I believe there are industry groupings for the thrift banks and the savings banks. If they do not have the latest in terms of what the latest vectors or the latest scam or fraud tools are, then they can attack it from an industry perspective. Come together as a industry group and engage with um, certain service providers who have expertise in that area.
To add to that, Thanh?
Yeah, so that's another interesting questions in terms of compensating in a way for fraud. So we do see that different regulators around, not just in APAC but around the world, have different approaches. So the more advanced reimbursement scheme that we have seen is of course in UK, where scam victims are being reimbursed up to certain amounts, and the liability is split between both banks and the consumers. In APAC, closer to home, you see Singapore last year, they launched a shared responsibility framework for unauthorized fraud. So you see that regulators do take this this problem more seriously, not just in APAC but also around the globe.
Oh, interesting. You think that's something that's going to continue to develop?
Yeah, we've seen already discussions in sort of Australia, Thailand around shared responsibility. Maybe not as clear cut as or more formalized as in Singapore, but those discussions happening around the regions already.
Yeah, interesting. Another interesting thing from your presentation was the incidence of scam centers on the border between Thailand and Myanmar. And which is fairly well documented in the recent weeks, with some serious action being taken to destroy those networks. But it's interesting from a related slide that the incidence of mule accounts and scamming in Thailand is considerably lower than it is in the more developed parts of Asia, Singapore, Hong Kong, etc. Is that because the GDP and therefore the savings of the people likely to be scammed is lower, so not such a worthwhile target, or some other demographic?
Yeah, I think for this particular analysis or case study that you're referring to, it was a bit more focused on, of course, around banks. So the perspective is from a banking perspective. Of course, if you look at from other industry perspective, we may get different heat map, for example. The other thing is that, of course, when you actually analyze fraud network, especially when they are linked together with the in other locations, you you look at, for example, a fraudulent device associated with 10 accounts, right? So that is basically your scope in a way. Of course, you can expand that scope across the region, across the globe, but that will a lot of these networks are loosely defined or loosely linked together. And of course, other network that operate in a different region may be smaller or larger. So we look at a very specific network, fraud network for that study.
Okay, there's a supplementary question here, which is actually addressed to you as well, which is, what do you think is the reason why scams are prevalent in the mountainous areas as stated in your slides?
Yeah, the assumption is that, of course, fraudsters or cyber criminals want to stay away from urban centers. And of course, the border area is a convenient place for them to actually cross over the border in case they find, they identify dangers early on. Of course, so that's one of the probably the assumptions, that they are along that borderline of those areas.
So if I'm understanding this right, Tan, they are located in the mountainous regions, but they are actually perpetrating their crimes on people in the urban areas, right?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
So they target, of course, not just within that region, but around the region and globally as well. Yeah,
that's right.
Anything to add from your side, Gabby?
Well, I think the statistics speak for themselves. These particular scams, vectors continually evolve. I think they will continue to look for high value targets. But what we're also seeing in the Philippines is the rise of amateurs who now move in, Facebook Marketplace. They do very simple selling something on the marketplace, do not deliver, but then they defraud the buyer of his funds. So very rudimentary, but still, it's also a scam that uses mules, money mules. So what we're seeing is that it's not just sophisticated scammers, even amateur scammers. So we still need to be on our high alert, and we need to continue to watch the perimeter, close these mule accounts once they're proven to be mule accounts, and just make the world smaller for these scammers.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot of the regulators, certainly here I live in Thailand, here in Thailand, the Bank of Thailand is taking steps to eliminate mule accounts,
Yes.
and making it more difficult for accounts to be opened. And I guess that's a continuing challenge, but the one takeaway from me, well, not the one, but one of the biggest takeaways for me is just the sheer scale of this, 5 million fraudulent attacks per day.
Yes.
That's just staggering, absolutely staggering. And I think at that point, I should hand it over to Thai to sum up what's been, I think, a very engaging and productive session. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Michael. Online fraud, as we know, has evolved into a lucrative business for cyber criminals. They employ various methods such as phishing, malicious app, exploiting data breaches, and social engineering to trick unsuspecting victims into sharing their sensitive information and coercing victims into transferring funds from their own account to scammers. So these scams often exploit human vulnerability, relying on trust and urgency to manipulate their targets. As cybercrime continue to evolve, scams and money mules activity pose a significant threat to individuals and organizations. But by understanding the tactics employed by scammers and raising awareness about the risk of becoming a money mule and implementing robust fraud detection measures, organizations can strengthen their defenses against this criminal. And it's a collaborative effort, as Gabby mentioned, is to stay informed, vigilant, and proactive approach in the fight against cybercrime.